She has always been there, the woman who lingers in silence inside the mind of every man, not flesh and bone, but a reflection, an image, an echo, a shadow. Carl Jung called her the anima, the feminine presence buried deep within the masculine psyche. You may never see her face, but you feel her in dreams, in the women you love, in the arguments that leave you broken, and in the longing that never quite goes away. Sometimes she whispers, sometimes she demands. She can seduce a man into madness or guide him toward his greatest transformation. But most men run from her. They deny her. They try to silence her voice. And when they do, she does not disappear. She grows darker, sharper, and more destructive. This is the story of the woman who lives inside every man's shadow, the anima, and why Jung believed that a man's destiny depends on whether he dares to face her or whether he is ruled by her from the depths of his unconscious. Stay with this journey, because by the end, you will see how the anima explains not only why men are haunted by certain women, but also why their relationships, desires, and very sense of self are bound to the mystery of the feminine. Jung's psychology rests on a bold truth. Every human being carries the opposite gender within. In the psyche of the man, this opposite takes the form of the anima. She is not a literal woman. She is the archetype of the feminine, the collection of images, emotions, and intuitions that color how a man perceives women, love, and the depths of his soul. Imagine a man standing in front of a mirror. Behind him, invisible to his conscious mind, is a figure, the woman in his shadow. She carries the traits he represses: vulnerability, emotional depth, intuition, creativity, tenderness, even chaos. The very things his culture, his upbringing, or his own fears told him to reject. When a man represses these qualities, they do not vanish. They sink into the unconscious, where the anima takes hold of them, and from there, she rules invisibly, through dreams, through attraction, through projections onto the women he meets. This is why Jung said, every man carries within him the eternal image of woman. It is an image shaped by childhood experiences with mother, by culture, and by the archetypal layers of the collective unconscious. But here's the danger. If a man does not recognize this inner woman, he projects her onto real women in his life. He falls in love not with who they are, but with the hidden face of his own soul. Every man knows the haunting experience of falling for a woman who feels more like a dream than a person. She embodies his ideal. She feels like destiny. He cannot explain the attraction. This is the anima at work. Jung warned that when the anima is projected, she enchants a man into obsession. He believes he has met the one. He sees in her what he has long denied in himself: the tenderness, the passion, the mystery. But this projection is a trap, because no woman can carry the weight of another person's unconscious. No relationship can survive when it is built on fantasy instead of reality. The very qualities that enchanted him soon become sources of conflict. The dream collapses. The woman disappoints him, not because she has changed, but because she was never meant to be his inner image of the feminine. She was only herself. In this moment, a man has two choices. He can blame her, resent her, and search again for the perfect woman. Or he can turn inward, realizing that the anima he sought in her has always been inside his own shadow. This turning inward is the beginning of individuation. It is the path Jung called the most difficult and most necessary journey of a man's life. Jung described the anima as unfolding in 4 stages, each representing a deeper encounter with the feminine. Eve, the anima, begins as pure biological desire, rooted in the image of mother and lover. She is physical, instinctual, tied to the survival of the species. At this stage, a man seeks women primarily for comfort, sex, and security. Helen, named after Helen of Troy, she embodies beauty, seduction, and romantic enchantment. At this stage, the anima lures a man into passion and obsession. He is intoxicated by women who embody his fantasies of beauty and desire. Mary, here the anima evolves into a figure of virtue, wisdom, and devotion. She inspires loyalty, morality, and a higher sense of meaning in relationships. A man at this stage seeks not just passion, but purity and partnership. Sophia, the final and highest stage, the anima as wisdom, no longer projected onto women. She becomes an inner guide, a voice of intuition and insight. She leads a man not into obsession with others, but into union with his own soul. Each stage is a mirror of a man's growth. To remain fixated on Eve or Helen is to remain trapped in obsession and fantasy. To integrate Mary and Sophia is to discover the feminine within, and with it, a deeper wholeness. Yet the anima is not always a muse. She is also a destroyer. When repressed, she does not become silent. She grows vengeful. Jung described how an unintegrated anima can plunge a man into moods of irrationality, depression, and even self-destruction. She appears in nightmares as a witch, a siren, a seductress who drains him of life. Think of the man who becomes enslaved by addiction to women, pornography, or toxic relationships. Beneath his behavior is the anima, demanding recognition, punishing him for denying her. Jung believed that the anima, like all archetypes, has both light and dark. She is eros, connection, creativity, but also chaos, obsession, madness. To fear her is to remain enslaved. To face her is to gain wisdom. The woman in a man's shadow is not a lover, not a wife, not even the image of a mother. She is something more elusive, more dangerous, and more transformative. She is the anima, the feminine archetype that Jung believed rests at the heart of every man's unconscious. The anima is both radiant and destructive. She whispers in his dreams, pulls him toward desires he cannot explain, and haunts his emotions with moods that feel too raw, too unmanageable. She is the reason a man is inexplicably enchanted by one woman, while feeling nothing for another. She is the invisible hand that shapes his longings, his fantasies, his poetry, and even his despair. But the anima does not live on the surface of his life. She hides in the shadow. She emerges through projection, attaching herself to the women a man meets in the external world. When he looks into their eyes, he does not see them for who they truly are. Instead, he sees the anima, the inner woman within himself, reflected back at him. This is why Jung warned that a man often falls in love not with a woman, but with his own soul disguised as her. He loves not a reality, but his own projection. And when that projection shatters, when the real woman cannot bear the impossible weight of his inner goddess, he feels betrayed, abandoned, and broken. The anima, when unconscious, is cruel. She binds him to illusions. She makes him worship idols of his own making. She leads him into obsession, jealousy, despair, or even madness. Jung saw her as both muse and demon, salvation and destruction. But when a man recognizes her, not in the faces of the women he chases, but as a living force inside his own psyche, she transforms. She becomes a bridge between his ego and the depths of his soul. She guides him into the inner world, into dreams, creativity, and spiritual awakening. She becomes Sophia, the wise feminine who reveals to him the mystery of his own being. This is why Jung said the task of a man is not to conquer the anima, but to enter into dialogue with her, to listen to her moods, her images, her symbols, to let her guide him into what is repressed, what he fears, and what he denies. Because until he meets her consciously, she will rule him unconsciously. She will manipulate his relationships, poison his emotions, and keep him enslaved to illusions. But once he sees her, truly sees her, he begins to realize that the woman who lives inside his shadow is not his enemy. She is his path. The anima does not simply emerge as a charming muse. She is, at her core, a double-edged archetype. She can inspire, but she can also deceive. Jung explained that the anima, when repressed or denied, does not vanish. Instead, she sinks deeper into the unconscious, becoming more primitive, more resistant, and more destructive. In this buried form, she takes her revenge by disrupting a man's relationships, clouding his judgment, or pulling him toward women who embody his shadow's unresolved chaos. This is why so many men find themselves repeating the same painful patterns in love. They do not understand that the woman they keep meeting is not simply external fate, but an internal figure. It is the anima choosing, projecting, and shaping their attraction. What looks like chance is, in reality, an intimate mirror of the psyche. Think of the man who feels an immediate, irrational pull toward a woman who appears to him as a goddess, only to discover later that she is deeply incompatible, manipulative, or emotionally unavailable. The intensity of his attraction was not grounded in reality. It was the anima demanding recognition. She lured him not because of who the woman was, but because of who he refused to see within himself. Jung warned that when a man does not take responsibility for his anima, she rules him from the shadows. She controls his fantasies, governs his moods, and distorts his perception of women. The feminine inside becomes a tyrant, not a guide. But when the anima is integrated, something extraordinary happens. She transforms from a siren into a bridge. No longer a haunting echo of repressed desire, she becomes a voice that connects a man's ego with his soul. Jung called this the mediator to the unconscious. She speaks in dreams, in moments of intuition, in the sudden surge of creativity that seems to come from nowhere. The man who befriends his anima does not fear her. He listens to her whispers without being seduced by her illusions. He learns to see women as they are, not as canvases for his projections, but as individuals with their own depths. He no longer needs him to carry the burden of his inner feminine, because he has learned to embrace it himself. This is perhaps the greatest secret Jung revealed, that the anima is not about external women at all. She is about a man's capacity to encounter life with imagination, sensitivity, and emotional depth. She is his ability to love, not because he has found a perfect partner, but because he has awakened to the wholeness within. And yet, this awakening is not easy. It requires suffering. It requires recognizing the patterns of projection, the illusions of idealization, the heartbreaks that force a man to finally ask, what is it in me that keeps summoning this experience? When that question is asked sincerely, the anima stirs differently. She no longer disguises herself in the faces of women outside. Instead, she turns inward, guiding him confront the unloved, unacknowledged parts of himself. She demands that he sit with his grief, his longing, his vulnerability, and finally see them not as weaknesses, but as the very essence of his humanity. The feminine figure inside a man's unconscious does not emerge as a quiet whisper. She makes herself known through attraction, rejection, sudden fascination, and a relentless repetition of emotional experiences. Jung observed that a man often encounters his inner woman first in projection. He sees her not within himself, but in the woman who stands before him. When a man falls in love at first sight, it may not be the actual woman he sees. Rather, he is encountering the luminous reflection of his own anima. She is dazzling because she carries the qualities he has disowned: tenderness, imagination, receptivity, mystery, intuitive wisdom. She appears on a woman's face, but her roots are deep in the man's unconscious. This is why men sometimes become obsessed, even irrational, in the presence of certain women. The woman herself may not possess all the qualities he perceives, yet in his eyes she glows with a transcendent aura. Jung called this the anima projection. The woman has become the vessel for his inner goddess. But when projection collapses, when reality intrudes, the man often feels disillusioned, even betrayed. The woman has not changed, only the spell is broken. Here, Jung's teaching cuts deep. The beauty, wisdom, and love he imagined in her were always his own unclaimed inner treasures. She mirrored what was hidden in his shadow. And yet, projection is not simply a trap. It is a summons. For in falling under the spell of the anima, the man is being invited to reclaim his own soul. The attraction is a message. Find within yourself what you've given away to the other. But to heed this call requires courage. For to embrace the anima is also to meet her darker face. The anima is not only muse, not only goddess. She can also be seductress, destroyer, whisperer of despair. Jung wrote that she may appear as a voice that says, "You are nothing," or as a temptress who lures a man into ruin. This darker anima is equally a projection of what lies in his shadow: the pain, the vulnerability, the unintegrated longing he has refused to acknowledge. Thus, the man must not worship her blindly, nor demonize her when she wounds him. Instead, he must learn to walk into the fire she brings, to see both her beauty and her terror as aspects of his own unconscious. In relationships, this dance becomes most vivid. A man projects his inner woman onto his partner, and she becomes more than herself in his eyes. Angel or demon, savior or destroyer. If he does not recognize the projection, he binds her with chains she cannot bear, demanding that she carry the burden of his inner life. Conflict erupts. Disappointment festers. He blames her for failing to be the goddess he imagined, when in truth, it was never hers to carry. But if he can see clearly, if he can name the projection, then love takes on a new depth. For now he sees her as she truly is, not as his shadow requires her to be. And in that moment, he begins the real work, to integrate the anima, to welcome her into his inner life as guide, rather than cast her outward as illusion. Jung called this process a step toward individuation, the journey of becoming whole. The man who integrates his anima no longer seeks his soul only in another. He discovers within himself the very qualities he longed for: tenderness, receptivity, intuition, imagination, love. He no longer fears the feminine within him, and therefore he no longer seeks to control or diminish the feminine outside him. But such integration does not arrive in a single epiphany. It is earned in the slow alchemy of self-awareness. The anima appears again and again, in dreams and fantasies, in relationships. Each appearance is a test. Will he cling to the illusion, or will he recognize her as his own reflection? Every time he chooses reflection, the projection dissolves, and a piece of his shadow becomes light. The woman who lives inside a man's shadow is not a neat, polished figure. She does not appear like a goddess stepping down from heaven, clothed in perfection. She comes raw, wild, and often fragmented. She speaks in contradictions, because she carries both the light a man has longed for and the darkness he has run from. In dreams, she may arrive as the woman who both attracts and terrifies. In waking life, she appears as a kind of woman who unsettles him, not because of who she is, but because she mirrors back to him what he cannot yet reconcile within himself. Carl Jung knew this. The anima is not simply the inner feminine. She is the man's soul image, the living embodiment of all that he has exiled into his unconscious. When a man resists her presence, she takes on destructive qualities. She becomes manipulative, seductive, even cruel. But when a man begins to integrate her, she becomes a bridge to meaning, to love, to a deeper relationship with both himself and others. The tragedy is that most men spend their lives oscillating between worshiping and demonizing women because they do not realize that they are projecting their anima outward. The beloved becomes the saint, the unattainable muse, the woman placed on a pedestal. But when she disappoints him, when she proves human, fallible, imperfect, the same man condemns her, curses her, or withdraws in bitterness. It is not the external woman he is battling with. It is a shadowed feminine within. And here lies the paradox. The anima does not ask for perfection. She asks for attention. She does not demand that a man eliminate her darker aspects, but that he acknowledge them, feel them, and allow them a voice. In ignoring her, he becomes her captive. In listening to her, he becomes her partner. This is why Jung insisted that individuation is a confrontation with the unconscious. A man who does not descend into his own depths will continue to circle around external women, searching for salvation through them while never touching the woman within. It is not enough to love women. A man must learn to love the anima inside himself, the one who brings dreams, fantasies, longings, and grief. To reject her is to reject life itself, because she is the very doorway to soul. She is not an accessory to masculinity. She is its other half. When a man denies her, he fragments. He becomes rigid, brittle, unable to move with the rhythm of life. He becomes all surface and no depth, armored in logic but starving in heart. And so, the anima finds her way back to him through his relationships, through his failures, through his restless longing for something he cannot name. The woman who lives inside his shadow will never leave him. She will wait, patiently or destructively, until he turns inward and meets her gaze, because only then does he stop projecting. Only then does he begin to truly see women as they are, not as mirrors of his unconscious, not as containers of his denied emotions, but as human beings. And in that moment, he awakens to love, not as an external possession, but as a force that rises from within. The woman in a man's shadow often appears first in subtle ways. She may come as a dream figure, veiled in mystery, embodying both comfort and terror. Jung observed that she often carries opposite qualities to what the man consciously identifies with. If he prides himself on being rational, she will emerge as irrational. If he builds his persona on strength, she will appear weak, vulnerable, or chaotic. In this paradox, she teaches him that wholeness does not come by rejecting what he despises, but by integrating it. She is both muse and destroyer. Many men project her onto external women, idealizing them, worshiping them, or condemning them. These projections, however, are distortions of an inner figure. The man may find himself obsessed, not with the woman herself, but with the part of his own psyche she awakens. He sees in her something he has not reconciled within himself. This is why relationships can feel intoxicating or terrifying, as if something deeper than two people is at play. The danger arises when he refuses to recognize her within. In that denial, she becomes darker, more destructive. She can manifest as irrational jealousy, uncontrollable longing, or sudden rage. Men who are enslaved by her projections may find themselves repeatedly choosing partners who embody her shadow traits. They will wonder why the same story repeats, yet the pattern continues until they look inward. Jung warned that without conscious encounter, the inner woman becomes a tyrant. She demands attention through external drama, failed relationships, infidelity, or constant disappointment. But when acknowledged, she transforms. The chaotic seductress becomes the wise guide. She no longer undermines his stability but enriches it, softening his rigidity with empathy and imagination. This transformation is not theoretical. It is lived. A man must sit with his fantasies, his longings, his fears, and ask, what is this woman inside me trying to show me? She is not an enemy but a bridge. She connects his rational ego to the depths of his soul. Through her, he learns to love more authentically, not through projection but through presence. The woman in his shadow whispers to him of the forgotten. She carries the grief he never cried, the desires he never admitted, the tenderness he once deemed weak. To face her is to risk vulnerability, but to deny her is to live half a life. Every man who dares this encounter finds that she does not take away his strength, she deepens it. The feminine figure within a man's unconscious is not a silent observer. She is a voice that whispers, criticizes, inspires, and sometimes sabotages. When Jung spoke of the anima, he referred to her as a bridge to the deepest layers of the unconscious, an archetype carrying both creative power and destructive chaos. She is not chosen by him, nor shaped by conscious preference. She is inherited, woven from the threads of his personal history and the collective patterns of humanity. She arrives as an inheritance of myth and memory, shaping how he relates to women outside himself and how he encounters the unknown within. The man who ignores this woman inside him finds himself repeatedly drawn into relationships that mirror her unresolved shape. If she is projected negatively, he sees women as deceptive, cruel, irrational, or demanding. If she is split into idealization, he sees them as angelic, unattainable, flawless muses who can never exist in reality. In both cases, he is not meeting women as they are, but as mirrors of the shadowed feminine he refuses to recognize in himself. His relationships become battlegrounds, not because of who women truly are, but because he is at war with his own hidden anima. The shadow complicates this further. The feminine archetype, when buried in the unconscious, fuses with his darker instincts, jealousy, possessiveness, need for control, or fear of intimacy. He may believe he is rational, detached, and in control, but beneath the surface, the shadow anima brews storms of emotional turbulence. The sudden anger at rejection, the obsession that follows abandonment, the inability to accept vulnerability, all are signs that the woman in his shadow is not yet recognized, not yet honored. Jung insisted that integration does not mean suppressing this figure or pretending she does not exist. It means meeting her face to face, allowing her to speak without disguises, and understanding her symbolic nature. She is not literally a woman, but the embodiment of feeling, intuition, receptivity, and connection to the depths of life. When a man finally listens to her without fear, his relationships transform. Women cease to be mirrors of his projections and become individuals in their own right. Love deepens, not because it is free from conflict, but because it is rooted in authenticity rather than fantasy. The man who befriends the anima within no longer fears the irrationality of emotion. He recognizes that the chaos she brings is also the soil of creativity. Many of history's greatest artists, poets, and thinkers produce their work under the guidance of this inner feminine presence. She whispered inspiration, carried visions from the unconscious, and demanded that they be expressed. Without her, rationality dries into sterile logic. With her, life floods with meaning and mystery. And yet, Jung also warned that this relationship can turn poisonous if unacknowledged. The anima, unintegrated, may possess a man. He becomes moody, unstable, consumed by fantasies, unable to separate reality from projection. The more he resists her presence, the more she controls him from below. It is not unusual for men who deny their inner feminine to swing between extremes of domination and dependence, cruelty and neediness, cold detachment and burning obsession. These oscillations are not signs of external betrayal, but the inner feminine demanding recognition. The work of individuation demands that a man descend into this inner realm, not as conqueror, but as listener. To sit with a woman in his shadow is to face his own emotional wounds, his fear of intimacy, and his resistance to vulnerability. It is to confront the parts of himself he has dismissed as weak or irrational, and to discover that they are, in truth, the roots of his humanity. In this confrontation, the man discovers that she has been both enemy and ally all along. She wounds him when ignored, yet guides him when acknowledged. She destabilizes him when denied, yet balances him when integrated. This paradox is the essence of shadow work. To realize that what you fear most in yourself is also what you most need to become whole. The man who recognizes the anima within is not softened into weakness, as culture often fears, but strengthened with depth. He becomes capable of love without possession, of creativity without madness, of intuition without delusion. He can meet women not as projections of his unconscious, but as equals, partners, and mirrors of mutual growth. The woman who once haunted his shadow now becomes his inner guide, leading him toward wholeness. But the danger is not only in clinging to her. The danger is also in denying her altogether. The man who insists he is entirely rational, who swears that he is unmoved by emotions, who dismisses imagination and intuition as foolish. This man is not free of the anima. He is simply possessed by her unconsciously. She then acts through his moods. He might be seized by inexplicable irritability, by depressions he cannot name, by sudden attractions to women that feel fated but destructive. She influences his fantasies, leading him to escape into daydreams or obsessions. In denying her, he gives her more power. Jung saw this paradox again and again. The more a man tries to escape his anima, the deeper he falls under her spell. But the man who dares to confront her, who dares to acknowledge her, begins the process of individuation, the lifelong work of becoming whole. And individuation requires courage, for meeting the anima is not a gentle encounter. She does not present herself as a pleasant companion. She comes as a test, a trial, a flame that burns illusions. Jung described her as a bridge to the unconscious, which means she brings not only beauty, but darkness. When a man dreams of the anima, she may appear as a guide, a wise woman leading him through shadowed forests. But she may also appear as a witch, a siren, a deceiver. Each form reflects his relationship with her and with himself. If she appears hostile, it is often because he has resisted her truths. Yet to move forward, he must listen. For the anima, at her deepest level, is not meant to destroy. She is meant to transform. She asks the man, can you feel? Can you surrender control? Can you hold beauty and terror in the same heart? She is the keeper of eros, not merely sexual desire, but a connective tissue of life, the force that binds him to the world, to love, to meaning. When the anima is denied, life becomes dry. When she is integrated, life becomes alive with color. And here lies a mystery that Jung pointed to again and again. The anima is not merely a psychological concept. She is a living archetype, a presence older than memory, a figure that men across cultures have met in myth, in vision, in dream. She is the goddess in disguise, the eternal woman within the masculine soul. And now we arrive at the final veil, the most profound truth hidden in Jung's vision. The woman who lives inside every man's shadow is not an intruder. She is not an enemy. She is not a weakness. She is the forgotten half of the masculine spirit. The tragedy of modern man is not that he is too rational, too strong, or too disciplined. His tragedy is that he has severed his bond with the very essence that gives his life warmth, beauty, and soul. The anima is the pulse of poetry, the echo of myth, the song of longing that makes a man look at the stars and feel both small and infinite. Without her, a man can achieve everything and still feel hollow. With her, even the smallest act becomes infused with sacred meaning. This is why Jung insisted that integration is not a luxury, it is a necessity. For when the anima remains banished, she rules in the shadows, distorting love into obsession, desire into addiction, longing into despair. But when she is embraced, when she is invited into the circle of consciousness, she becomes a guide, a muse, a compass pointing toward wholeness. Imagine, then, the man who has dared to look into his own depths and has not turned away. He does not see the feminine within his weakness, but as the most powerful ally he could ever possess. He becomes less rigid, yet more grounded, less controlling, yet more capable of true influence, less consumed by hunger, yet more filled with love. The world senses the difference in him. His relationships shift, not because he tries to control others, but because he no longer projects his inner feminine onto them unconsciously. He no longer worships women as goddesses, nor resents them as enemies. He sees them, finally, as human beings, reflections of the anima he has come to know within. This is not the end of the journey, of course. Jung was clear. Individuation is a lifelong process. The anima does not simply appear once and then disappear. She evolves as a man evolves, guiding him deeper into mystery, into wisdom, into soul. She is, in the truest sense, the woman who never leaves. And so the question falls upon every man. Will you continue to exile her, letting her haunt your dreams and twist your desires in the shadows? Or will you turn to face her, listen to her voice, and allow her to become the bridge between who you are and who you were always meant to be? The answer does not lie in books or theories. It lies in the silent dialogue between a man and his soul. And perhaps that is the final secret of Jung's insight. The woman in the shadow is not merely inside every man. She is his soul, waiting patiently for him to come home. So, we arrive at the end of this long journey together. But here's the truth. Shadow work never really ends. It is not a task you check off like a to-do list. It is a lifelong process of peeling back the layers of illusion, reclaiming lost fragments of the self, and daring to walk into the unknown with radical honesty. If you've come this far, you've already proven that you are not afraid to face what most people run from. You are willing to sit with your discomfort. You are willing to hear the whispers of the inner child, the screams of rejected self, and the silent longing of the unlived life. And because of that, you will rise differently. But let me leave you with this. Small blue diamond, every relationship you attract is a mirror. The lovers who break your heart, the friends who betray you, the bosses who dismiss you, the strangers who trigger you, all of them are teachers sent to reflect back what you have not yet owned. Do not curse them. Thank them. For without their mirror, you would never have seen the shadow standing silently behind you. Small blue diamond, you are not broken. The things you hide, the wounds you try to bury, the shame you carry, none of it makes you unworthy of love. In fact, it is these very wounds that, when embraced, become your greatest medicine. Small blue diamond's silence is power. Sometimes the greatest transformation doesn't come from chasing answers, but from pausing, breathing, and listening to the voice that arises when the noise finally stops. And so, as you leave this video, I invite you to do something radical. Tonight, when you are alone, stand in front of a mirror. Look into your own eyes. Not at your hair, not at your skin, not at your flaws, but into the deep space behind your eyes. Whisper to yourself, I see you. I accept you. I will not abandon you again. That simple act is shadow work. That simple act is how you stop attracting toxic reflections. Because when you accept the truth of who you are, you no longer need others to carry it for you. And now, imagine this. A future where you walk into relationships not from emptiness, but from wholeness. Where your love is not a desperate hunger, but a radiant overflow. Where instead of asking, will they choose me? You simply ask, do they align with the truth of who I am? That is where your power lies. That is how you stop the cycle. That is the freedom Jung spoke of when he said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. So, the choice is yours. Fate or freedom. Projection or presence. Shadow or light. Thank you for walking this path with me. Until next time, remember, the mirror is always speaking. The question is, are you ready to listen?